Hi, everybody. Welcome, welcome. I'm one of your two hosts within the Nine Sided Circle, Nor Kyle.
And I am two of your two hosts, Mushtaq Ali.
There you go. Yeah, everyone, so excited to have so many familiar and new faces here tonight. Not tonight, this morning for us. This is our other talk, which we do once monthly at 10:30 a.m. on the third Sunday for us of each month, and that is Pacific time. Also, we do a weekly talk every Sunday, barring other, details at 6:30 p.m. Pacific time. So if either of those times work for you, or both of them, you can join us. All right, so a little bit of a YouTube spiel, of course. So one way to support our channel and to support our work generally is to engage with us on YouTube. So that means like our video if that's what you feel and you want to share it. That helps us out a lot.
Yeah.
Subscribe to our channel to get updates, and of course, leave comments. Engage with each other, it doesn't just have to be me and Mushtaq responding to you. You might have something you want to share with other people in the comments as well.
Yeah, we have gotten some brilliant answers to comments from total strangers. So,
Yeah, yeah. And as our channel grows, we do appreciate the engagement with one another, as this is a community, and it is not just about me and Mushtaq.
well, it's a lot about you.
We don't mind the spotlight. um, what else? Anything? Have I forgotten anything?
No, you got the like our video part, which is important for us because the only way that the YouTube algorithm knows that we exist is if we get likes. I mean, I see that
Yes,
because
and
it's like trolling for your attention, but we would like to have our videos seen by as many people as can benefit from them. So like
mhm,
our videos.
there you go.
Yeah.
Other than that, oh yeah, I mean, if you want to follow us on Facebook and I was going to say integrate, which is fine. If you want to integrate into the community, that's awesome. Facebook is probably the best way to do that. We have a group. We also have a mailing list, which you may find helpful for getting connected to our content and be able to participate in these talks, especially. Uh, Donate. We are still doing our fund drive, which means you
Which we do
can,
until we've gotten enough donations to operate for the year.
yeah. Yes, unfortunately, although we do put this out into the world for free, it is not free for us. So that is one way to keep us going. Thank you so much to those
Yeah.
who continue to help.
And
We
if you're
really
not in a
appreciate it.
position to donate, that's okay. We don't mind. Remember us fondly to God. That helps too.
That helps too. Without further ado, the topic at hand today for our other talk for the month of January 2024,
What
we
are
are
we
going
talking
to
about today?
we're going to be talking about trance and hypnosis, both in the work of Gurdjieff and within Sufi practice. So this is a pretty substantial topic
Yeah.
with a degree of nuance involved, which is very important. So let's explore that. I think one thing we often talk about in this space is the fact that we aim to be quote unquote awake. And that means being present, being aware, attending to what is present for us in terms of our sensory experience, internally and externally, and being with the breath, of course. And all of this involves letting go to the fullest extent that we can of all the filters and projections we tend to put upon our reality. And at the same time, we're going to be talking about putting filters on reality, on narrowing one's focus. And this can be done, or is typically done, unintentionally, almost constantly. But there is a place in the work, both in terms of the Gurdjieff work and in Sufi work, of applying this limited, narrow focus of attention on purpose and for a purpose. So we'll be talking a bit about all of that today.
So let me tell you a story. This is how I first discovered this. Take yourself back to 1967. That'll be hard for some of you because you weren't around then. Imagine San Francisco. In San Francisco, focus in on Haight-Ashbury. And imagine a young hippie who looks very much like me, but had really long hair.
That was a different color, perhaps.
It was, yeah, it wasn't white back then. So, on Haight, there was the Digger's store. The Digger's store was a free store. Literally, you didn't pay for anything that was there. Consequently, I frequented it a fair bit. This was in the summer. This was June of 1967. And they had a huge bin of books that people had just donated. And one of the books was called In Search of the Miraculous. And in that book was a lot of weird stuff. So I picked it up and read it. And amongst other things, it talked about the protagonist of the book, Mr. G, and his experiments with hypnosis. And it talked about how he would use his hypnotic skills to put people in a trance and make their mechanical self go to sleep and allow their essential self to come to the fore. And one of the things that he observed was that the essential self was most often not terribly developed. It was sometimes like talking with a child. And he made statements like, we live in trances. I'm paraphrasing here. The idea of human beings being somnambulistic, walking sleep, in a walking sleep throughout the day, and how we aren't singular, but we're multiple. And all of these ideas fascinated me. And so I started studying hypnosis. Back then, you could not find very much on the subject. You could get stage hypnosis. And I soon realized that stage hypnosis was not what I was looking for. I have no interest in making people bark like chickens, and didn't even back then. Not even a good party trick. But as time progressed, I traveled about in the Maghreb. You know the Maghreb? You know what I mean when I say that? It's the western, northern, it's the North Africa from Egypt to Morocco, basically. All of those countries up there. Maghreb means west. And in Morocco, let me tell you, Moroccan Sufis have got the trance thing down. They use really specific kinds of music with complex rhythms that you don't usually find. 7/4 beats and 13/4. If you can imagine, for those of you who know music, imagine playing a 13/4 piece. That's, we don't need to go into the details. Anyway, it's wild stuff. And it's with movement and voice, it can produce profound trances. And I found that very interesting. In some ways, I have never seen that kind of trance induction more effectively than there. The trouble was that it wasn't being used for much other than, you get into an ecstatic state and then you're done. Sometimes you like run skewers through yourself or stab yourself with swords and stuff. And I never had any interest in that. I grew up where people were trying to stab me without my permission, let alone with it. So after a few years of knocking about and trying to find the secret to this, my question was, where did Gurdjieff learn and develop his hypnotic skills? Because he, by all accounts, was a master of this. And at one point in his life, he made a vow not to use it anymore because he said it made his life too easy. He could basically get anything he wanted because he understood the mechanical nature of human beings and how to push the right buttons at the right times. So he swore off using it. By and large, he never stopped using it, but he used it for very specific purposes after that, rather than to make his life easier. I got back from my long journey and was living in Northern California in the Santa Cruz Mountains. Me and two friends, we were working, making money in strange ways. A lot of it involved digging giant redwood stumps out of the ground and then cutting them up to make tables and clocks and things like that. It was very popular back then. Good, honest labor. And one day, the girlfriend of one of my buddies came in and she said, I just had the weirdest experience. And now I should say that I lived a mile and a half up a mountain road from the highway. And so usually to get up, you either walk, which is a drag, or you hitchhike, which people did back then. And so she hitchhiked up and she got a ride with this guy. And she said, this was the strangest pickup attempt that I had ever experienced.
Wow.
And this dude was telling me about this book that he wrote. He and his partner. And she showed me the book. It was called The Structure of Magic. And this was Richard Bandler was the one who was going up the road. And he didn't manage to pick her up, but he gave her a free copy of the book, which she wanted nothing to do with. So I asked her if I could have it. She gave it to me. And the rest is history, because that introduced me to the work of Milton H. Erickson, MD, who was explained to me how the Sufi masters produce trance. Erickson was a master of indirect hypnosis, and he did it with stories. And if you can imagine what it would be like to have this, some years of going, how the hell are they doing this? And then somebody hands you a book that explains it all. How language is being used. And they went on to produce other books, and I actually ended up studying with them there in Santa Cruz for a while and honing my skills. but it taught me some things. And I went on to become first a hypnotherapist and then a teacher of that particular art. And I was quite good at it, if I do say so myself, at the risk of being immodest. And one day, somebody asked me, "How come you're such a good hypnotist?" And I told them, I realized at one point that I didn't need to hypnotize people because they were already in trance. I just needed to figure out how to direct the trances into areas that might do them some good. And so that's how this started. And from then to now, I have observed the great Sufi teachers who I've had the honor to be around. And there are some of them who have, we call it karamat in Arabic, which is oftentimes translated as miracles, but it's not. It doesn't mean miracles. It doesn't mean violating the laws of physics. What it means is charismatic powers, charismatic skills. And that's what hypnosis is. It is the ability to create rapport and then create a milieu in which a person can learn. All right, I want everybody to sit up and take a breath. What did you learn from that story?
That we're all somehow in a trance. We may not know it, but for those that have knowledge of that art, they will probably see that trance and be able to use it.
Yes, for good or ill. Yeah, trance is like a hammer. You can build a house with it or you can brain somebody with it. Other thoughts?
When you realize the power of trance, you would rather not have the power of trance because life becomes too predictable and too easy.
Sometimes, yeah. Did anybody realize that they were going into trance as I was telling that story?
We've got some head nods to the affirmative.
Good. So what is trance? Trance is a state where you are deeply focused with a limited section of attention. Your attention is limited, your focus is deep, and you usually move slightly away from the present.
So there is something very natural about that.
Trance is completely natural. It's one of our superpowers.
Yeah.
And we don't know how to use it in this modern world. Trance is something that should be used intentionally for certain reasons. You use it for deep learning. You use it for dealing with nafs stuff. That's a technical term, nafs stuff. Tell us about nafs stuff, my love.
Enough stuff. We can think of that as, I'm going to use our favorite word, the detritus that we collect over a lifetime. So we can consider it ego stuff, we can consider it traumas, all of the things that stick to us, that obligate us to work through them in order to navigate life in a way that is open and fulfilling and truly meaningful. And so there are ways in which trance allows us to engage with those parts of ourselves that we may otherwise be perhaps oblivious to or so deeply affected by that we can't get around them.
Yeah, let me give you an example of Knopf stuff. So, my brother almost got court-martialed in Vietnam. He was in the Navy, and he was a member of a crew of what they call a PBR, Patrol Boat River. He and his buddies zipped around in this little boat up and down the Mekong Delta. Now, one morning, he was walking down the path to the boat, and a snake wiggled across the path. Now, my brother was terrified of snakes. When I say terrified, I mean he grabbed his M16 off his shoulder, unloaded a full clip, dropped it, grabbed his shotgun off his other shoulder, and unloaded the entire tube of shotgun shells into the snake.
Probably before he had even realized
Before he
he had done
realized
that.
anything else.
Yeah.
So everybody comes running. They think that their position is under attack, and he's there still clicking on the empty shotgun. And they asked him what's going wrong, and all he could do was point and say, "Snake." He gets hauled before the commanding officer, and they explain what was going on, and the commander looks at him and says, "Why didn't you use a grenade?" And he said, stopped and thought, "I didn't have one."
Thank God.
So he got reprimanded, but they didn't court-martial him. So that's how great his fear of snakes was. Now, roll forward until 1984. And he and I are teaching together in Los Angeles, which is where he lived. And he became a teacher. And we're talking about this phenomena of how do you deal with a phobia like that? And I asked for a volunteer because I was going to demonstrate. And he volunteered, and he picked fear of snakes. And so I put him in a live trance, and I got him to tell me what it was like to experience a snake. And the main thing for him was that when he saw a snake, he imagined them as feeling slimy and cold. That was the trigger for his phobia. When he saw a snake, he imagined that snake being slimy and cold. So in the next 10 minutes, I taught him how to imagine the snake feeling dry and room temperature. And yeah, tweaked it a little bit here and there. And the upshot was that later that day, we went to a pet store, and I had him petting and handling snakes for the first time in his life without that reaction coming in, just by knowing what to change. He was amazed. Everybody was amazed. I had to stop him from buying a pet snake.
Probably very much for the best.
For the best, because, yeah, the dog would have ate it.
No.
So that is a positive use of hypnosis. If you understand the patterns of mechanical behavior, you can interrupt those patterns, and you can't make them go away, but you can change them to things that are more useful for the person in their quest for awakening.
So we have a question from Khalil.
Okay, Khalil has good questions. Yeah.
Do you think that the effectiveness of any story or narrative is a function of the degree to which it can induce a trance state in the listener?
I would say all stories induce a trance state. The effectiveness of the story is in how it is constructed and what message it gives. So, as you all know, I love the stories of Mullah Nasruddin Hoja. Always have since the first day I ran across them, which was also back in the 60s. And that's because they made you think like a Zen koan makes you think, but they were funny. And that funny part was important because it created a positive state in you that allowed you to accept the message. So I can tell you a story that can make you happy. It's not actually making you happy. You're making yourself happy just by following the instructions in the story. I can tell you a story that can make you sad. I wouldn't do that usually, but so the story is a tool. The content of the story is the structure, and within that structure is embedded instructions for how to get from one state to another. As far as I can tell from, I mean, I never met Gurdjieff. I wish I had. It would have been interesting. But from the accounts of his students, the ones who actually knew him, he was definitely a master of this. Now, how do you develop this incredible power?
By
Everybody
freeing
talk at once.
Well,
by freeing ourselves from our own trance patterns.
Yes. And by being able to induce working trances in yourself when necessary. So back in the days of Bandler and Grinder, they talked about having learned to,
I got it taken care of.
okay, having to learn to work in what they called uptime. And uptime was basically just the awake state. You know, you're not talking to yourself in your head. You're not considering. You are present in the room, in your body, paying attention in a broad way to everything that's going on, but especially to the person or people you're working with. So in order to do this, you have to be able to cultivate that state. And that's just what we call the awake state. And the awake state is easy. And I've said this probably a million times now, but I'm going to say it again. You want to know what the awake state is like? Who here wants to know what the awake state is like? Show of hands. All right.
Always worth explaining.
Yeah. So this is what I want to do, what I want you to do. I want you to Ask yourself, am I awake or am I asleep? And then go inside and look, check, see if you're awake or see if you're asleep. The act of doing this produces the awake state. You have to be awake to check. That's the awake state. That's it. That's all it is. Now hold that for 5 minutes. Hold that state for 5 minutes. If you can hold that state for 5 minutes, you're the Buddha. It ain't easy. But you notice that when you ask yourself that, you create a state of presence in yourself. Now, the moment you relax, all of the mechanical stuff comes rolling back in. You have to begin to clean the attic and clean the cellar. You have to be able to integrate. Another interesting thing, Gurdjieff talked about people not being one. In Ericksonian hypnosis, there is a technique called the parts party. If somebody has a particular behavior that is detrimental to them, you can deal with that behavior as if that were a subpersonality within the person. And you can talk to that subpersonality. And it can be done in very light trance or very deep trance. And here's the thing. Believe it or not, every part of you has your best interest at heart. You know the part of you that makes you do stupid shit? It has your best interest at heart. It wants you to be okay. It wants to serve you, protect you, all of this stuff. It just doesn't know how. Somebody has a question here.
Yeah, we have a few remarks from Khalil and a question from Scott. I'll just read through them if that's okay. Khalil said, Mullah Nasruddin is also known as Juha in some Arabic cultures. Continues to say,
Adopted by any other name will still smell as sweet.
Khalil says, also, this was, how do you enter a trance, or how do you induce trance? Also by using keywords and linguistic methods like you can, ... and if you want, you may, ... and pacing and leading. Yes, this would all be part of, if you talk about narrative hypnosis, it would be part of the narrative.
That's specifically called using the modal operator of possibility.
Yeah.
I don't know if you realize that you can feel your feet right now. And just by feeling your feet, you might find that your awareness comes up your body slowly. And I don't know where your awareness is going to stop, but it will stop somewhere. And when you find the place that your awareness stops moving up your body, you can close your eyes now. Yeah, like that. You'd be surprised how many people blinked.
I mean, it's kind of funny because that sounds like every meditation audio.
It is every meditation.
Yeah. Right. So this is used in just, so many common contexts.
Yeah, guided meditation is just a fancy name for hypnosis so that it doesn't scare people.
Exactly. All right, so then we have a question from Scott who asks, how does asking whether or not you are awake apply to lucid dreaming?
That's how I learned that question.
Once you realize you are dreaming, are you quote unquote awake?
In the dream, yes.
In that relative environment, yes.
Yeah, you can be awake in the dream. and you can be awake in the waking dream. And it's exactly the same technique. I used to be very, very interested in lucid dreaming since I was a kid. And I learned that the way for me to most easily wake up in my dream was to ask myself that question throughout the day, to the point where it became like a habit. And I would ask myself that question in my dream and then go, oh, I'm dreaming. Way faster than telling yourself to look for your hands or any of that other stupid.
Or read a clock or
Yeah.
words. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So that's how I developed that question, because of course I asked myself, if that works in the dream, what about now? What about when I'm awake? Am I awake? Oh, yeah, now I'm awake. I was off somewhere before. And this is the idea of people being somnambulistic, sleepwalking. When you are turned inward, when you are away from the present moment, when you have set aside your ability to perceive the world around you in present time, you go to sleep. This is what Gurdjieff talked about. This is what Sufis have been talking about for the last 1400 years. Some Sufis.
All right, so before all that, we were starting to touch on the parts party
Oh, yes,
and
the birds party.
putting ourselves
Yeah.
perhaps into trance for a purpose.
Yeah. If I had somebody who was having this kind of problem, I would ask to talk to that part of them. And there are various different ways that you get a response. Most common is what's called ideomotor response, a movement in the body. And it's fun to watch. But we would develop a dialogue. And inevitably, 100% of the time, every part of them wants the best for them, even if it's doing something stupid
Or hurtful.
or
Even.
hurtful. Yeah, I
Yeah.
qualify that as stupid too. And I'll give you an example of this. I had a woman who had cancer, and it was stage 4 something or other. It was the kind that could kill you, but is not as scary as like pancreatic cancer or melanoma. And so she was desperate. She came to me for whatever help I could give her.
To cope or?
To do whatever. She wanted to heal herself.
Mm.
And so I put her in a deep trance, deep trance. I made her conscious mind go away because I had this intuition that this was going to be interesting. And I talked with the part that is creating the cancer. I don't know if this is real, but as metaphor, it worked. And the question was, why are you doing this? And the answer was to protect her. That part of her was protecting her from an emotional trauma so bad that killing her was better than her experiencing it. So we worked out a deal where we could give that part a new way to protect her. Now, coincidentally, and remember, correlation is not causation, but coincidentally, she went into remission. And the last time I talked to her, which was probably 10 years ago, she's still alive. But I cannot claim that there's a cause and effect relationship between the trance and her remission. And somebody asked, kind of sounds like an exorcism, except that you're not dealing with an external entity. You're dealing with yourself. Most
And
people are fragmented.
yeah, and I would also say, in my experience, it's not necessarily the purpose to get the part to go away.
No, you never make the part go away.
Yeah, because you're supposed to be engaging with them on a level that acknowledges them and allows for them to share what they have to say or what they have to offer.
And how they function for the benefit of the whole person.
Yeah.
Now, along with this, Gurdjieff says, and we totally agree with this, that human beings are fragmented. You have all of these different eyes, which are like the parts. And each of these eyes does not know the other. They're all connected. And the only reason that you don't notice this is because every one of those eyes has the same name.
I think of them as fragments of what we call ego. Yeah.
Yeah. You have one body that has the same body sensation for all of the parts. And you have a certain core set of habits that operate below the level of the parts. So you can't tell whether it's Noor 1 or Noor 2 or Noor 10 that is operating at the moment. Now, Gurdjieff also said that it is a major part of the work to unify these parts. This is what we call work on the nafs. Nafs is the ego parts, and it moves through certain stages. And what you end up with at the end is a unity. Sometimes that's as easy as introducing one part to another.
And of saying, hey, maybe we don't agree with how this part is handling the situation, but they are trying to help. So how can we help them help everyone? Yeah.
But you can go, all right, I would like everybody to do an experiment. I want you to think of a time when you were really happy. And when you can remember this time, I want you to take your hands and take one hand and squeeze this point, front and back, just like this, and then let it go. Now, forget about that. Totally forget about it. Think of something else. Think of blue cats walking across the purple rug. Get it completely out of your mind. Now, squeeze this again. How many of you noticed that that sensation of happiness returned? Yeah, it's called anchoring. It's a simple technique. Now imagine if you did that to somebody and you anchored one part of them, and then you anchored another part of them that could aid the first part in whatever they're doing. Then you touch both at the same time. If one touch brings up one, the other touch brings up the other, you bring up both at the same time and they meet neurologically. And oftentimes they combine. It's a really interesting phenomenon. It's not something that you want to do randomly. You got to know what the hell you're doing. Or you can arguably screw somebody up. But if you know what you're doing, you can help them combine the fragments of themselves towards a permanent I. Weird, huh?
How new?
Yes.
So is anchoring the reason that certain fragrances bring your memory right back to where you were when you first
Absolutely,
sensed them?
especially fragrances. Every representational system. That's like your vision, your touch, your hearing goes through the reticular body, except for smell. Smell goes directly into the brain. So if I ask you to remember a particular smell from your childhood, perhaps breakfast being cooked on a Saturday afternoon in your kitchen.
Wet paper towels for some reason.
Any of these things, it will bring back whatever that is, and it will bring it back strongly because there is no filter on that. Yeah, so, and this is why aromatherapy actually works. Did you know that the smell of fresh rosemary will increase your memory? I kid you not. It's the weirdest thing. It will sharpen your memory.
Because of that direct neural
Yeah.
access of scent.
Yeah. And I have no explanation for why that particular scent works in that particular way, but yeah, scent, first of all, it was our first sense as living beings, not just humans, as amoebas, right? Amoebas related to the rest of the world. They relate to the rest of the world in chemical transference. Scent tells us if something is safe or bad, or possibly safe or bad. You go up to a carcass, right? You're a hunter-gatherer and you sniff the carcass, and if it stinks, you don't want to eat it. You smell the smell of a fresh orange as you peel it off the tree, and you know that it's good to eat. So, thank you, Khalil. That is a very good point. So, is there a point to all of this? What have you learned from this? Talk to us. You all have experiences that will let you know the truth of what I'm saying, because you all have minds, you all have bodies. We don't even have time to talk about how the body plays into this, but it does in a profound way. You all have the ability to develop these skills. When I used to teach this, I ran probably the most successful Ericksonian model hypnosis school in the Greater Bay Area back in the 80s.
Pretty intensive program.
Yeah, it was more intensive than any other hypnosis certifying program in the country, and we always had a waiting list, even though it cost twice as much and it took a year rather than 6 weeks.
Because you wanted people to be able to use it wisely.
Yeah, if I have my name on it, you damn well better do it right.
Yeah, yeah.
Total ego.
Well, the thing is, this doesn't, you know, when it comes to working with others, definitely need to be very careful and, you know, it's kind of a hands-off thing, but with ourselves, I feel like there's a lot of potential there for positive work.
Oh, yeah. If you know what you're doing, you can do self-hypnosis for things like problem solving, or for learning, or for accessing memory, or a lot of different things. Who would like to learn a simple self-hypnosis induction?
Yeah.
Sure.
Do this. Let me get my picture back. Take your hand and put it.
Sorry, one second. There we go.
So what I want you to do is to look at your hand and not let it drop any more quickly than you're willing to go into a light trance for about 20 seconds and then bring yourself out. So leave it up there, let it relax, let it float until it's ready to go down on its own. And as it goes down, you can let yourself close your eyes when you're ready and go into a very light trance. And when your hand touches your lap or the table or the ground, you can stop for a second, realize that, yeah, you can do it. And then you can open your eyes. Take a breath. Check and make sure everything's still there. You may notice that you feel a little bit more awake now. You can use this particular induction to create a trance. And the idea is you tell yourself, I want to go into a trance. I want to access my unconscious to solve a problem. And I would like to have my hand go down, go into the trance, be in the trance when my hand hits the bottom of its arc, and then let everything work. And when the problem is worked out, I want to open my eyes and be wide awake. And then you do that. And then you can open your eyes and be wide awake and look around, check over the left shoulder, check over the right shoulder. That's right. I'm talking to you. There you go. Yeah, you know who you are.
So some of us may find that we are a bit, I want to say reluctant rather than resistant, because we are all susceptible to trances. I can't think of a single person I've ever met who is immune. And why would you want to be? Because, there are many reasons why we have the capacity to be entranced. We've used the example of driving in a car, for example. People who are drivers, I am not one, but I've had the experience of driving. You do a better job driving when you're in a trance than if you're trying to be fully present and focused on each and every single detail. It's a key skill. But what I was going to say was, you may find yourself needing to remind yourself that you are safe in trance, that you are opening yourself up to deeper possibilities, as opposed to, I'm going to sit here and I'm going to fight this. That can be a way of inducing in and of itself.
Oh yeah. One of my favorite things for resistant people, so-called, is to teach them how not to go into trance.
Yeah. And, I've been on both sides of that. I find it very easy to put myself into trance. And when other people do it, I tend to feel very, at least in my mind, resistant to that.
Oh yeah. Which makes it really easy for me to put her into a trance. Like, darling, whatever you do, don't go into a trance.
Yeah. Yeah. So just keep that in mind and realize that there's nothing wrong with you either way. Whether you're easy to go into trance or find yourself resistant, there's nothing wrong with you.
Yeah,
And there's nothing better about you either. Let's put it that way as well.
Yeah, I have trained myself to be able to go into trance incredibly easily. And that is both for me, doing it to me, and for other people doing it to me if I trust them.
Mm-hmm.
Arden did a trance on me, our friend Arden Lee, and it was great. And I felt completely comfortable putting my brain in her hands. But I also have hardwired in processes by which if I notice that somebody is doing an induction on me without my permission to respond in certain ways.
Ominous.
And everybody should do that. Hypnotic self-defense is really important, especially these days, and especially if you're a woman.
Mhm.
Because back in the early 80s, there was this phenomena, pickup artists. And it was started by a guy who had studied NLP, more or less. He started teaching guys,
Neuro-linguistic programming.
how to manipulate women in ways that would get them to do what he wanted, whether they thought it was a good idea or not. And it was incredibly vile, incredibly unethical. And so as part of my institute, I started a women-only class on how to notice when somebody was pulling this shit on you and how to counteract it. Most popular class I've ever done. It was always full.
Yeah, that sounds like might even be a session unto itself.
Yeah.
Talk.
Yeah, I'm beginning to think that one day in the not too distant future, we may do a course on hypnosis for Sufis.
Mhm. So we have a question from Vox. I can't remember what BBT stands for. In BBT, Gurdjieff seems to infer that hypnosis is connected to the Gym or astral body. What are your thoughts on this?
It was a useful metaphor for him at the time. I personally have not noticed that I have an actual astral body or a causal body or any other kind of those bodies. Beelzebub's tails, yes.
Okay, yeah.
But it's a good metaphor. It's a way of talking about a real phenomena. So hypnosis is a method by which you can work with a person's unconscious mind.
Or your own.
Or your own, if you are a person. And work therapeutically. It's like the little quote we used for this from Milton Erickson. Hypnosis is not a cure. It's a way of creating the proper environment for learning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Does that sort of answer your question?
Kind of.
What can I clarify more?
And if speaking on mic, I don't know if that's an option for you, Vox, but if that makes it easier.
Yeah, go for it. This is the time where everybody talks anyway, so.
Yeah, I have another question, a good one from Levita that I'm holding on to. You can't. It's for me to think it through, says
Okay.
Vox. Yeah, I mean, I think
When you figure it out, let me know because I'm interested in your answer.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, you offered your thoughts, Mushtaq. So,
Yeah.
all right. I am going to hold on to Levita's for a moment because I think it requires a good answer. Yusuf asks, curious how the practice of zikr, that's like a recitation in Islam and in the Sufi tradition of a kind of a mantra.
Yeah.
Yeah. Curious how the practice of zikr relates to trance versus the awake state.
And that's a funny one because it can go either way.
Yeah, that's what I feel.
Yeah. Dhikr can put you into deep trance. Go to Morocco. Trust me, you'll experience that if you find the right group. Or it can bring you into a state of profound awakeness. And it's all about how the practice is programmed, what the intention is.
And there's a place for both, but you don't want to get them mixed up. You don't want, sitting down and having the intention of being awake to turn into a deep trance state, for example.
Yeah. And there are two kinds of Sufis, they say. There are actually probably three kinds of Sufis, but that's for the next talk. There are what they call sober Sufis and ecstatic Sufis or drunken Sufis. The ecstatic Sufis are the ones who really dig the trance states. And the sober Sufis would prefer to avoid trance and go for the awake state. In Western thought, it's the difference between Apollonian and Dionysian experience. Yeah, fana versus itlaq. Yes, itlaq means liberation. Fana means annihilation.
Okay.
So,
yeah,
folks, what do you think?
Oh, well, I still have that other question.
Yeah, Levita's question. Let's not forget that.
And this is, I think, an important thing to, if possible, elaborate on. So, what is the difference between trance state and dissociation?
Dissociation and trance oftentimes go together. There are specific dissociative trances. For instance, I was teaching hypnosis at a little college way up in Northern California, near a tiny town called Garberville. And the college was 20 miles from the main road. And one day, this young woman was walking down the side of a hill and she slipped, spiral fracture in her leg. She was in massive pain. And she was one of my students. And so I have somebody running into my class and saying, you have to come, you have to come. This woman has hurt herself and she's calling for you specifically. So I come and I realize her leg is totally busted and she's in massive pain. And so I begin talking with her as we get a stretcher and get her to a van so we can take her to a hospital, which is going to take us an hour over dirt road with lots of washboarding. And so,
bumping all over the place.
The slightest movement causes pain. So I put her in a trance and I completely dissociated her from her body. And she was relatively comfortable on that ride. I talked to her the entire way, kept her as deep as I could get her, and kept her completely, we would say, out of your body, but she wasn't out of her body. She was just dissociated from it. So dissociation has its place in trance. Though from a Sufi perspective, we would rather associate and dissociate for a normal, healthy person. If somebody is dying of an incredibly painful disease, I will dissociate them so far that they won't even notice that they have an incredibly painful disease if I can get away with it.
If
Milton,
that's what they want, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah,
think-
Milton is famous for going in with clients who were dying of cancer far beyond what the pain relievers could give relief for, and putting them into trance and making them comfortable for however long they needed to have that.
yeah, and I think in your mind, and as we would talk about this one-on-one, of course, consent is kind of an unspoken necessity, but I just want to speak to that, like, of course, consent has to come into play.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, we can choose to dissociate. Like, for me, I know that playing video games is going to put me into a trance, and sometimes I may choose to do that because I know it will have dissociative effects. Let's say I'm under stress from things going on in my non-video game life, let's put it that way. And I want to bracket out some time where I'm not so connected and involved with those aspects of my daily consciousness. So I'm enjoying that time of dissociation on purpose so that I can give myself some breathing room. There's nothing wrong with that, but I also know that there is a specific amount of time I'm giving myself to do that, and that I will return to that which I have dissociated from, so that I can continue to deal with that as well.
So,
Yeah.
Khalil, talk to us.
So what's the difference between trance and what they call ecstasy or ecstatic experience?
It will depend a little bit on what the ecstasy is, what the ecstatic experience is, but mostly not much. Lavina.
Who, you got muted again.
Okay, I'm having trouble with my phone. So let me see if I understand you correctly. Trance state and dissociative states on a fundamental level are identical. The difference is really in when you're disassociating, a lot of times it's involuntary to avoid pain or a really bad situation.
Yeah, that's pretty close. Yeah, involuntary dissociative states tend to be problematic.
Okay, yeah.
Not all the time, but most of the time.
Yeah. I had a situation one time where I was given a drug. I was undergoing a procedure under local anesthetic. And it was very strange because, which I can remember the drug's name, but they gave me the shot, they waited 10 minutes, and then they did the procedure. And the point of the drug was was supposed to be an anesthetic, but it wasn't. And now I have the word for it. It basically disassociated me from the pain because I felt it, every bit of it. But I didn't care. It was like I was above it, as opposed to in it. I wish I could remember it because I would know never to take it again.
Oh my God.
Never let anybody give it to me. But yeah, because I've heard of people disassociating when they're going through traumatic situations, like when you have to run and you have to do stuff, but it's really bad, like right, like war or you're being mugged or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But like I said, I always thought trance was something different. But I guess it's more about the purpose of one or the other, which makes it trance versus, I mean, I don't know, so I'm asking.
Yeah, no, this is a great question.
Yeah, most dissociative states are a form of trance, as far as I can tell. And it's funny you mentioned that, because hypnosis is used in surgery sometimes. Um, we have people in the world who are completely allergic to pretty much every form of anesthetic around. And as a last ditch effect, last ditch thing to do, you can use hypnosis. Some days are better than others with that. I have done that with dental work, which is interesting. Carol Erickson was, she's Milton Erickson's oldest daughter, and she would only use hypnosis on herself for dental work. And she would say to the doctor, all right, watch my hand. When my hand touches the arm of the chair, you can start work. And she would put herself into a deep dissociative trance. They would work on her teeth, and they would be done. She would bring herself back out. She would teach them how to bring her out. And she never had to deal with having her face numb for half a day.
Yeah, that's always fun.
Yeah. So it can be done. Yeah, I'm sorry that you got that drug. There's some other dissociative drugs that are pretty damn good.
Yeah.
When I had my cataract surgery, they use a dissociative drug, and it was like Zen in a bottle. I was completely present, totally awake, and couldn't feel a thing. And I didn't care.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny because I did feel it. It was painful. I didn't care, but I don't like, I can tell the story and I'm not feeling traumatized by it. Like it just happened. Right. So it's one of those things where I know if I ever were able to look at my medical records and find out the name of that drug, I'd be like, no, I don't want that one. Give me something else.
Yeah.
But it's not, but I can tell other stories where it's like today, 35 years later, I can tell the story without feeling traumatized. But it was a really long time before I was able to separate what happened from how I felt.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
all right, let's get Kristen's question.
Thank you, Levita.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tell us.
Hello. My question pertains to rumination and daydreaming, and this is something I really struggle with, especially lately, where I will catch myself ruminating about something that happened in the past, or daydreaming about the future, either positively or negatively, and I am completely caught up and immersed in that state, either in I'm like back in the past, or I'm in the future, putting myself in the future. And I find that for me, like this is kind of like a negative trance, a bad trance, because it feels very unconscious and mechanical to me. It's not something I intend. Those aren't places I intentionally go to. My mind wanders off there, and and then I snap out of it, and 5, 10, 15 minutes have gone by, when I really should have been doing something else. So yeah, I'm wondering about is rumination and daydreaming, are these kind of,
Those are
would these be
trances.
considered the bad trances, or is there like, if so, is there like a way to
bad or good per se? It's how you use it. And it sounds like you could make better use of it than what you're doing.
Right.
The good news is that you do trance really well. I don't know if you know that, but you do trance really well. And so you can teach yourself to only use things like rumination when you need it. And that's an interesting possibility, because we all need to be able to do that. Otherwise, you will not be able to access knowledge that you have picked up in your life. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, that totally makes sense. Yeah, I guess it's just like I'm trying to kind of get a better control of it and
Yeah.
like not, you know, just drift into it unconsciously or mechanically, you know, just I'm wondering if there's like a trance practice to get me out of the bad or what I'm considering to be like a not great trance practice, or you know, yeah, just getting a better handle on it for sure.
There are several practices. We don't have time to go into them now, but are you on the forum?
I am, yes.
Okay, then
Yeah.
ping me on the forum and I can give you a couple of suggestions.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Appreciate that. Thank you. Cool.
Okay, so I'm gonna ask Vox's question and then Khalil, I saw you put your hand up. Okay, so Vox asks, so if used consciously, it's a powerful tool for learning and decrystallizing?
Absolutely.
Trance, yes.
Yes, absolutely, yes. And
yeah.
it is an important tool in the Sheikh's toolbox. Now, understand that
Sheikh meaning Sufi guide.
The guide, the teacher, the person who is helping you get to where you need to go.
Yeah, I guess it doesn't have to be just a Sufi Sheikh. Could be whoever.
Yeah, I didn't say Sufi Sheikh, but
I said that, yes.
But I mean, you can have a Wiccan Sheikh. They might not know that they are one, but they are. And I was looking at you, Scott.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I've had some interesting experiences where I literally, you know, I acknowledge that there are three parts of my ego, my nafs, my, you know, not essential self, are sitting and having a conversation together. They're learning about each other. They're learning about how they can support each other, how they trip each other up. And those are ways in which I learn how to navigate life with them and also motivate them towards change, which is important for all of me. And it allows my essence to take control because those parts of me are not vying so much for power.
Yeah. What she said. Khalil, talk to us.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I know we're almost out of time, but I was just really curious by what Levita said because, and if she's willing to share, why, if the drug she was given made her not care about the pain, why she counts that as a negative experience and wouldn't want to repeat that. I was a little confused about that.
May I?
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
I count it as a negative because the purpose of being given that drug was so that I wouldn't feel pain. And somebody said once that every organism moves away from pain and towards pleasure. So I will count myself in that subset. If I hadn't felt it, if I was aware of it and I was able to know exactly what they did and be aware for it, but not feel the pain, I would have counted it as a positive.
Mm-hmm.
It was negative because I actually felt all the pain. Now, I wasn't screaming or anything like that. I just was aware of it. So I was above it. And this happened 20 some odd years ago. So I was above it. So I can like look back at it and go, well, I didn't find it traumatizing at the time or today, but it wasn't optimum. So it kind of is like positive, negative. It's kind of like this. It's not like this. It's more like, you know, I wouldn't undergo that again, but I was okay.
Uh-huh.
You know, it's like if you ever go to a restaurant and you don't get the experience that you wanted, depending on how it was, you might be like, I'll give them another try.
Mm-hmm.
Or you might go, yeah, it's okay. I'm not doing that again. So that's kind of how I counted it.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I get it.
Thank you. to both of you. Yeah. So, Fox says in response to what I was saying, it sounds like developing a community of you. In a way, yeah. I mean, that's how I experienced that practice, and that's why I would use it, is kind of allowing for better function, allowing for more flexibility. I mean, we talk about that physically, but let's talk about that emotionally and psychologically as well, right? And if everybody's kind of on the same team inside of you, then it's much easier to get things done. There's a bit of diplomacy involved, perhaps, but you need to set aside time and create an environment in which that's possible. And for me, that literally involved like setting up 3 separate chairs and then allowing myself to step into embodying those different parts, and movement between chairs was kind of like an induction into that. Any other thoughts or questions? Zach?
And this made me realize that the brain is much more malleable than we're led to think.
Oh, yes.
And from a neurological standpoint, I think the state of trance induced by stories to varying degrees depend on how malleable is the network and what type of activation does the story have on that network.
And
And
don't
then you
forget
mentioned
how good the programmer is.
yeah. And part of the programming, there is this divide and conquer in programming, which basically, if you have a super large problem, you can break it down into smaller manageable pieces.
Yep.
And once you start fixing one piece, it almost like fractalizes upwards and it fixes the rest.
Yeah.
And that's kind
And
of
the
like
human
one.
mind is very much like that.
Yeah, I mean, like that's the technique he described in the form of breaking down into or finding different personas to tap into.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. Exactly.
I love programming metaphors.
Yeah.
Who haven't we heard from?
Yusuf. Scott had a great question earlier. Yeah, Yusuf K.
Yes, Yusuf.
Yeah. I'm actually a professional coach. I'm not practicing it, but I had the education, and we also learned some NLP methods, this
Mm-hmm.
neuro-linguistic programming, and some of those methods, like anchoring, and I don't know if you know that swish method.
Yeah, I know them
s-
all.
Yeah, some of them sounds like cheating.
Oh, yeah.
Because I was thinking that it doesn't fit to the concept of work, because I have to the work of Gurdjieff work, of course.
Mhm.
Um, um, it is like there is a warning lamp and I remove it. It doesn't bring any light, so I don't see it. So um, for example, I have a stage phobia. Huh? I don't want to go on a stage or talk to a crowd. But if I make this swish method, it goes away. So, but the reason that I had that phobia is something deep and
Is it?
still there.
Is it?
I think it is. I don't
How
know.
do you know? How do you know it's still there?
Because I didn't see the reason. I just make that
Yeah,
switch.
here's the thing. You don't need to know the reason.
Mm.
Knowing the reason is like the least interesting part of this kind of work. And I used to demonstrate this by helping somebody do change without ever knowing what their problem was.
Mm.
Because it's the pattern that makes the change. Knowing the
Yes.
reason most often anchors the change rather than, or anchors the problem rather than removing it. If
Then
knowing
it sounds like
if knowing the reason really worked, Freudian psychology would not take 25 years. And at the end of it, you end up being a well-adjusted neurotic.
Because there's the attachment to the story behind the pattern.
Yeah. And so
isn't that too easy?
why should that be too easy? Why does it need to be any harder than it needs to be?
I don't know.
Think about that. Why do you need to suffer unnecessarily? And this is where Gurdjieff got people into trouble, is he used to talk about making super efforts. The only effort that counts is the super effort. And this is not true.
I will think about it.
The effort that counts is the effort that is effective. And super efforts are not the only efforts that are effective. This is a moralistic problem rather than an actual functional problem. And so I invite you just to entertain for a minute or 5 or 10 the idea that you need to do the exact amount of work necessary, and suffering is not necessarily a part of that, especially for simple change work.
Mm-hmm. That's so important to remember, is that if it's just a simple change, why overthink it? Why over dramatize it?
Yeah, I'll give you an example to that. Richard Bandler, who is a crazy son of a bitch, had a client come to him, a guy who was gay, and he didn't want to be gay. He says, I don't want to be gay. I want to completely reject my gayness. And so Bandler put him in a trance, deep trance. And he asked he tried to find this one part of him that was making him gay. And he found it, and he said, why are you making him gay? And the part says, it's a mistake. He's not really gay. He just did this thing somewhere back in his early life, and he's not really gay. He doesn't have the attractions that a normal gay person would have. I'm making up the conversation because it was very different than this, but that was the upshot. And so Bandler says, why don't you let him know that this is the case? And the part says, because it would kill him. It would destroy him to know that he has lived with this mistake his whole life. And so Bandler worked out a deal with this part to give this guy a religious experience that would transform him into a straight person.
All of this is in quotes, by the way.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it worked. The guy had a religious experience. He went from being gay to being straight, was perfectly happy, married a woman, lived happily ever after, as far as we know. And if he had known the reason for making that mistake, he would have been devastated. It would have been bad for him. So sometimes not knowing the reason is a good thing. Fixing the problem is what's important. It's like, you're a fragmented person. you start putting the fragments back together and you get better. Why do you need to know some event in your past life that made you fragmented? What is the value of that? And most of the time, the answer is none.
Okay. We have a couple of thoughts from Khalil.
Yeah.
Levita is in agreement, first of all, that just because it is work doesn't mean it has to be hard work. And Khalil asks, could it be like the difference between attaining enlightenment through LSD versus years of meditation? It's
No.
just too many, right?
Yeah. One is awake or one is not. How one gets awake, who knows? The question is, can you stay awake?
I would say, is it sustainable?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, because people have amazing experiences on substances or through ecstatic dance or whatever, and then it's gone a few days later or a week later or a month later, and they're wondering, how did they get back there again? Like, it's
It didn't
about
grow any roots. The roots
sustainability.
didn't go down very deep,
Yeah.
right?
Exactly.
And to answer your question about what is work and what is hard, the NLP guys stole the concept from programming, which is elegance. Is the work elegant? Elegant is doing the most amount of work with the least amount of lines of code. You can make a program with 1,000 lines of code that flashes hello world on the screen, or you can do 2 lines of code and flash the same message. The second example is elegant. The first example is in programming, we call it kludgy, just cramming stuff together to get the effect.
So Levita's on board with all that. Yeah. Yeah.
And Levita is dead on with it tends to be subjective.
Yeah, because I mean, one thing that's important to determine, like with this guy you mentioned who was, experiencing the world as a gay man and saying this is not what I want, right?
Yeah.
Like his subjective experience was this needs to go away, right? But for another person, they're completely content with that experience.
Yeah, and that's an important point to make. This is the exception, not the rule, this one guy.
Yeah.
I have never run across a person like this, but it's definitely a possibility. And being Bandler, it could have been complete fabrication too.
True. I mean, that could be his bias speaking.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're just telling a metaphor to make a point.
But underlying that is the sense of subjectivity,
Yes.
which is part of elegance, right? Like,
Yes.
do what works that works for you.
That achieves the outcome that you want.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So if the outcome that you want is awakening, then if you can do it in 10 steps rather than 100 steps, do it in 10 steps. Don't worry, there will be plenty of work. But I want to get rid of the idea of what the Gurdjieffians think of as super efforts. Because operating on 4 hours of sleep a night for a couple of weeks and doing hard physical labor every day, personally, I think that lowers you down on Maslow's hierarchy, not brings you up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But, if it works for you, do it. I have no objection to somebody doing really, really, really hard work all the time and suffering for years to get to where they want to go. Perfectly fine with me. If you needed my permission, you have it, but you don't. So don't worry about it.
Right. And to, as I like to do, tie all of this back to the topic of ours today, trance and hypnosis have their place. Although we are often banging on about being awake, we understand within the context of being awake, there can be background work that needs to be done through trance and hypnosis
Yeah.
in order to sustain awakeness.
And awake is not the only useful state.
Mm-hmm.
To go back to Kristen's question, if I could not go into a reverie, I would not know what to dress myself in the morning. Because I have to look back and go, oh, what did I wear yesterday? What do I feel like wearing? You know, what was fun? All of these things.
There's creativity in that.
Yeah. And that's absolutely necessary to have. And then you come back to your awake state and you experience the joy of being awake while putting your clothes on. But both are necessary. And anybody who tells you that you can only have the awake state and nothing else is trying to sell you something. You will never get there, nor would you want to if you did. This is not about cutting off any part of yourself and leaving it behind. It's about being able to use all of yourself. The Sufi would say, Allah has given you every part of yourself for a reason. Do not deny his gifts.
Amen. Yeah. Any last thoughts from people we haven't heard from before we say goodbye today? Like Yusuf A. or Ed?
Well, I'm still processing everything and trying to figure out how can I use it for my own awakening. That's where I'm kind of at right now. I'm still processing the information. But something was said earlier in terms of Mr. G had stated that the essence or that other part of us was like was undeveloped. And I wanted to get an understanding of what was meant by undeveloped, in what capacity.
He, in that particular case, I forget who it was who he used as a demonstration subject, but whereas their personality was very complex, very bright, very knowledgeable, their essence was like a 2-year-old child. That was the description. I wasn't there, so I can't give you any more information on that.
Mm-hmm.
And I have not experienced, and I have to tell you, I have experimented with this, with willing subjects as opposed to what Gurdjieff used to do. He would just do it to anybody who was a student. But I have never found that profound of a separation between personality and essence. But he said that he did, so I have to believe him in lieu of any contradictory evidence.
Yep.
So what are some of the things that when essence is developed, it can do?
Essence can be present. It can operate in the present. It can operate without conditioning. Essence has true free will. It has true choice, without quotes, as Mr. G would say. So rather than receiving a stimulus and letting the mechanical part of yourself pull up the particular program it developed to deal with that stimulus, essence can choose to act in a completely different way. Does that make sense?
It does.
Okay. Yusuf says, nothing else here. Beautiful stuff as always. We'll definitely be reflecting more on getting the different parts of myself to talk to each other.
I like that.
Yeah. So we have been going on for almost 2 hours, not quite, but close.
We do that. And we're going to
Yeah.
do at least another hour tonight. And
Mhm.
tonight's subject is going to be the third force.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is one that I really like. So if you can make it back, you should make it back because it's going to be fun too. If you can't, definitely watch us on Rewind.
Yeah. So thank you everyone for being here. Do you have us on Brady Bunch mode,
Not
Mushtaq?
yet, but I will.
Yeah.
There we go. Brady Bunch mode.
Yeah. Okay. All right, everyone. We can wave to each other and wave to everybody watching on the replay.
Bye,
Thank you
folks.
for giving us your time, and we'll see you later at 6:30 p.m. Pacific time.